What's the one thing I wish I'd known? I think I expected that work would remain the same, and I got a bit of a rude shock when I returned to work. My networks had changed completely. People had moved on, and so a lot of those relationships had weakened. I also faced a lot of flexibility bias.
I wish that I would have known to let go and to slow down. I didn't have to be everything for everybody, and that you're leaning into who you're becoming rather than trying to go back to who I was.
One of the things I wish I had known is how much life changes and how much priorities change. And you also start questioning about your purpose.
So one thing I wish I had known about was like how frustrating it is to come up against limits. And the second thing I learned was that how we have that propensity to, despite the same things all of us are going through, say that, oh, it's me. If it's hard, I have to try harder. I'm not the one coping, when actually, obviously, the system just wasn't built for us. And that's why now I tell women, okay, before you lean in, make sure that you know who you're leaning on.
Hello and welcome to Make It Work. Firstly, Happy Women's History Month and International Women's Day. In celebration of that, we at Make It Work organized our very first video conferencing event called Innovative Strategies for Modern Moms. That's right, it was curated for modern working moms like you and I. And this special episode features the highlights of that oversubscribed event. What makes it even more special is that we got to hear from previous inspiring guests from our show. So from the 100 over questions we received, 90% of us are asking three big questions. Number one, how can I blend motherhood and career? Number two, how do I find true flexibility at work? And three, what happens if I take a career break? So in this session, you'll hear firsthand from our inspiring guests on how they wrestle with these questions and how they figured out their unique paths. We have Sarah Piantry and Khatija Aslam, who are corporate leaders navigating return to work as well as job sharing. And we also have Karen Tay and Niti Nadaraja, who are coaches and entrepreneurs building their own portfolio careers. If you're looking for honest stories, practical strategies, and a new way to really find success for the modern mom, this is it. I can't wait to share it with you. Let's dive in.
So I just want to say a huge thank you for all of your coming here. Okay, so some insight. This is a word cloud out of the 100 over questions that came through the registration. So the question is, do you see yourself in this? Are these like the words and the questions that are swirling in your mind as you think about how to figure out your both and when we talk about career, when we talk about being around for our kids? And when I saw this, I really felt that this was me. I felt that all the questions, I saw myself in them, and I'm really excited to get into them for today. So this is just two simple bar charts to get a snapshot of who you are, right? When you came in to register, I asked you all like what your work status is and what kind of questions you have. So on the left, we see that most of us are full-time, and this is not mutually exclusive, right? You could be full-time and you could also be on maternity leave. You could be freelancing and you could be also running a business, or you could be job seeking at the same time. So the sense of the responses. And I think it's quite clear that most of us are still in maybe corporate roles, and we're really thinking about flexibility. We're thinking about how to grow and how to balance, right, between family and careers. And today we have our four amazing guests, these women who have been on the podcast before. So definitely go and listen to them. I think I've really tried to curate a panel that you get a whole range of how different people have made sense of that gray that I've been talking about between full-time corporate and full-time stay-at-home. Like there's Niti and Karen, I would say they're going to freelancing, they're doing their portfolio careers, they are coaches, and they've all come from corporate backgrounds. We have Sarah, who's done return to work, mentoring in her corporate role, and now building that out into the community. We have Khatija, who introduced me to the world of job sharing. And that's something also really unique as a way to find flexibility within corporate. And so I'm really looking forward today to hear, the different experiences of all our guests across, within corporate, outside of corporate. And also you can see that they all have kids of different ages, from Khatija's 3-month-old to Niti, who has a 10-year-old, right? Okay, so with that, let me start with a warm-up question. A quick brief introduction about yourself, and also answer this question from Lisa. So what is the one thing you know now that you wish you had known before becoming a working mom?
Sure. So my name's Niti. As Sarah mentioned before, I have a little bit of a portfolio career going on. I started my career in the law many years ago now, around about, I don't even remember how long, over 20 years ago, and a full-time lawyer two, so just coming out of COVID here in Melbourne, where we had extensive lockdowns. During those extensive lockdowns, I realised actually I didn't want to do what I was doing anymore, and so decided to start my own business in the coaching and diversity space, but being really mindful of the fact that I had a mortgage, I had two kids, I'd been the primary earner in my family. I decided to also balance that with a little bit of freelancing in the legal space, which I still do today. So in terms of this question, what's the one thing I wish I'd known? I was, I think, a little bit naive when I went on parental leave the first time round. I think I expected that when I returned from parental leave, work would remain the same. I really wasn't thinking about work changing at all when I returned from leave. I was purely thinking about how my life at home would change and having the kid would change. And yes, I would have the juggle, but work itself would be the same. And I got a bit of a rude shock when I returned to work after, I think it was 11 months of parental leave, and my networks had changed completely. People had moved on, and so a lot of those relationships had weakened. I also faced a lot of flexibility bias when I returned to work. I wanted to return initially 3 days a week, and eventually basically had the bias of you're not committed to your career attached to me for quite a significant amount of time because I was working flexibly. So I think looking back on it, and especially because I now do some coaching in the parental leave space as well and talk to many women who are going on leave and returning from leave, I really wish that someone had sat me down at that time and said to me, do you know what, think about this before you go on leave. Think about what you can do whilst you're potentially even on leave to maintain some of those connections. Doesn't need to be all consuming, but perhaps there are things you can do to support yourself and to take back some agency and power over your career, because no one's going to give that to you yourself. So for me, that's the big thing I wish I had known way back when.
Want me to go next?
Yes, thanks.
Yeah, sure.
Go ahead, Sarah.
Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Pantry. It's great to be here. The one thing that I wish I had known before being a working mum, a bit like Nitty, I think I assumed and never assumed that the success measures that had always worked for me in everything else in my life and my career were going to work in motherhood. If I read all the books, did all the courses, made my husband do it, have all of the lists, then I'm ready for this baby and it's going to be fine. And it was not. It literally knocked me for six in ways that I couldn't even articulate. So I suppose from my perspective, I wish that I would have known to let go and to slow down. That I didn't have to be everything for everybody, and that it was going to be a situation where you're leaning into who you're becoming rather than trying to go back to who I was. I think that was one of the biggest takeaways for me. And then the best piece of advice that I got when I became a mother and going back to work was be where your feet are. When you're at work, be at work, smash it, do what you need to do. When you're at home, be at home, be with your son, phones off, no emails, and just be present in the moments that you're in. And that's something that I've definitely taken forward with me.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you so much, Sarah. I remember that quote that you shared in our conversation in the podcast, and it stuck with me, and it's something I've passed on as well. So I love it. Be where your feet are. All right. Khadija, how about yourself?
Yeah, I love that too. And it's so easy to remember, right? Like, you don't have to, it's not super long. Yeah, I'm going to keep that with me too. Thanks, Sarah. So hi, everyone. My name is Khadija. I work part-time in a job share role as a marketing innovation lead at Zespri. This is a fresh kiwi fruit company from New Zealand. I started my career in the FMCG industry almost about, I think, 15 years ago now in marketing and innovation. I also run my own company, which I founded in 2023. It's called Moxie, which enables companies to build more inclusive workplaces for women. And it really came about, during that transitionary phase in my life as I transitioned from, becoming a mother. So I have 3 children. As Sarah mentioned, I have 3 girls, a 6-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 3-month-old. And I think one of the things I wish I had known before being a working mom is how much life changes and how much priorities change. No one really talks about it, or I guess you don't even pay attention to it so much. I looked around me, and it's not like I did not have other working moms around me, like even my own sister. We never really got into the nitty-gritty of it all about how she was juggling it with 2 children at that time. But it just hit me when I went back to work after my number 1, like, oh gosh, this is difficult. So, that's one thing I feel like, is to have more information on how exactly your life changes, how much priorities change. And you also start questioning about your purpose ultimately? How are you spending your time? Because now there's a bigger trade-off, right? There's another little being at home who's waiting for you. So for me, I started to question the purpose of the work that I was doing and how I'm spending my time. So I wish I had spent more time being really clear about it before becoming a working mom.
Yeah, I think purpose is such a big thing that changes, and it's not something that you can really anticipate until you actually go through it, right?
Yeah, and it can evolve,
Mm.
with time as well.
Right. Thank you. How about Karen?
Hi everyone, I'm Karen. So I'm born and raised Singaporean, but lived most of my life in the US, in the Bay Area most recently for the last 9 years. So if I've had many different careers. I started in the Singapore government. I led global tech talent operations for the Singapore government for a number of years in the Bay Area. The startups, and recently in this chapter, I've been running 2 companies. One of them is focused on fractional work for early stage startups, as well as another one is focused on building support systems to help women navigate adversity and transitions in our work-life journeys. So that's a very recent thing for me. I did not jump out of corporate when I first had my kids. They're 6 and 8 now. I actually had to stay and be the sole breadwinner when they were little because my husband was in school. So that was a really frustrating experience because I came up against the limits of, oh my gosh, like it's, when you're in corporate, you're really kind of molded into that system. You have to be in that system, right? But I also kind of I wish I had more autonomy. I did not at all when they were younger because I had to be that breadwinner. And I think if you ask me, what's the one thing I wish I had known about being a working mom was like how frustrating it is to come up against limits. Because in my 20s, I thought I just can be whatever I want. I have all my time. And then suddenly you have this triple whammy of you need money, right? And then you need time. You have no money, you have no time. You're trying to figure out how to suddenly optimize within that. So it was oh, I hated those limits, but they were also very clarifying for me as we pushed through them. And then I think the second thing I learned was that how we have that propensity to kind of, despite the same things all of us are going through, say that, oh, it's me. I haven't, if it's hard, I have to try harder. I'm not the one coping, when actually obviously the system just wasn't built for us. And that's why a lot of my work now, I tell women, okay, before you lean in, make sure you're leaning on, make sure you know who you're leaning on, and we help them assemble that when they go through transitions. Because if not, our default is to kind of blame ourselves. Why is it so hard? It is hard because it's not you. This is the system that has grown out of a certain family structure that's completely outdated, but systems change slowly. So those are my 2 things I wish people told me.
So good. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think you've really given a good perspective, Karen, about how it's beyond just yourself and even your own family systems, but the larger support and how it can be very systemic that we just don't realize. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. Great. So I really appreciate you all giving your introductions. And for everyone who just joined, we are going through this first question, a warm-up question, before we dive into more specific questions that we will look at today. That is a summary of what I've received from the hundreds of questions that you have put in as questions that you would like answered. So today we'll look at 3 big questions. The first one is, how do I really think about leaning into motherhood and career? And this is a question that all the panelists will get to chip in and answer for how they went through their own journey of figuring that out for themselves. And number 2 is, how do I go about finding these options for myself? And within that, there are ways of looking at it within the corporate setting and then also outside of corporate. So we'll hear each panelist share about their own experience, whether it's creating a program in the company or finding a way to share their job with someone else, or is it about starting something on their own? And I think a few of us have also asked questions about that, do you need to be a salesperson if you want to start your own business? And the last question that we'll have everyone come in again and share is, how do we stay relevant if we were to take a career break, and how long is it too long, right? I think that's a question as well that quite a few of us have asked. And you'll see that I've also in some sample specific questions asked by you all. I put the first names of most of the questionnaire. It's not that we're going to answer each specific question, but these are the kind of thoughts that are swirling as you approach this season. So with that, I'd like to open it up for our panelists to talk about how they personally thought through their decision process of leaning into both career and motherhood.
So I'm happy to go first. I think for me, what really jolted me into the thought process was my eldest was 6 months old when I found out I was pregnant, and that's when I was like, what the hell? Shit hit the fan. And I'm like, oh gosh, how am I gonna handle this moving forward? Because I knew that, I wanted to continue building my career in marketing and innovation, have that financial independence. Singapore is not a cheap place to live. And I wanted to be able to have that financial independence, provide, and support the family, but also do it sustainably whilst being present at home. So I think one of the first things I did was, I literally just went to a cafe with my journal. I spent some alone time trying to figure it out and jot down my thoughts, right? In terms of, and the framework I created was where I am currently, life wise, work wise, as a parent, and where I want to be in the future. And at that time, I had just gone back to work, and I remember seeing a VP who was also a working mom, and she was working full time, and she was traveling a lot all the time. And I remember thinking to myself, she had 3 kids as well. I remember thinking to myself, oh gosh, I don't know how she does it. And she looked really burnt out. So I knew that's not where I wanted to be in the future. And in the scope of work that I was in, I'd also come across a lot of colleagues, not a lot, but quite a few colleagues in the UK and Germany, Australia, who had done their roles part-time or through job sharing. So that kind of made me curious in terms of exploring a different model. Like, hey, could I design my life in a way where I could have the best of both worlds, be able to balance, well, not balance, but juggle having kids at home, but also still have my career going. So that's what made me explore the role of job sharing and working part-time in Singapore. And I did encounter challenges getting into this, which is what inspired me to start Moxie too. But I think just, and I'll go into that later in terms of how you can get there. But, I think just being really clear about what your aspirations are and how you visualize your life to be in the future is a good way to start.
I'm happy to go next. So I think for me, this has really changed over the years. So if I look back, so my eldest is nearly 11, so was obviously born way before COVID. And life was really different back then. I mean, it was hectic, and I spent my life literally running everywhere. Like, it was morning, get up, childcare drop off, rush to the office, rush back from the office, pick her up, dinner, bed, bath time. Oh, I now have an hour, and then I've got to go to bed and do it all over again. And it was pretty hectic. But it's funny, when I first started my career in the law, I remember in the first year that I was there looking at the other female role models around me and thinking, I don't want to do motherhood like any of them do it, because either they were partners who had no time with their families, or they had stepped back from that and sacrificed ambition. And so they were working in non-legal roles essentially now, so that they could have that flexibility at home. And I remember thinking, I don't want either of those things. I want both in some capacity, but I wasn't sure how I could ever get that in firms. And so I made the move at some point into in-house, which is where I ended up having my children. But truthfully, I think in the first many years, I really did just try and do it all. And I did get fairly burnt out doing that over the years. I did work 1 day a week from home, and I continued doing that for about 10 years. And so, long before COVID and remote working was a thing, because that for me was very, very, very important to do. And it was the one thing that sort of allowed me a little bit of sanity in the week. But I think fundamentally, when it comes to this question of having it all, my advice to women is always that it's not about having it all, because there is no magical it. There is only your all. And so what you need to work out for yourself is, what do I want and what do I need? And I think in order to answer that question, you really need to start with, what are the things that matter to me? What are my personal values? What are my priorities in life? And once you start there and understand what your guiding lights are in life, then I think you can start to carve out for yourself, well, what does that mean life looks like? And so for me, over the years, that's really changed. And so during COVID, I started to realize, oh my God, I could actually allow my kids to go and do extracurricular activities in the afternoon. That wasn't a thing until then. And so when I was making the decision to step into my own business, that was very much part of my decision making as well, was allowing my kids to also live the life that they might want to live, as much as me living the life I wanted to live. But equally, what I would also say, and I think this is really important too, is I am ambitious. You know, I do have a business that I dedicate a lot of time and effort into. And sometimes that means I'm working when they're at home. Sometimes it means I'm working in the evening. Sometimes it means I'm not around because I'm at an event. And I think, again, this comes back to what is important to you and how do you make things work for you. And for me, that side of things is equally as important. And yes, that can come with from time to time. But I think, again, anchoring back to what is important to me and how am I showing up when I am showing up is really important.
Thanks, Niti. Thanks, Khadija. I just wanted to make a quick comment that I think what I've seen as common points is that you all initially looked outside to see if there are any good role models, and before you look back inside to figure out whether this is what you would like for yourself. And I think that sounds like a really important step before we go into how do we actually negotiate how.
Hi. I think it's such a great point that you put there, Sarah. And Niti, what you were saying about kind of understanding what your it is, it goes back to, again, of Kathidra's purpose piece, right? And I think that's one of the big realizations for me of understanding where my standards are coming from. So what's my definition of being a good mum? And what's my definition of being a successful woman? Right? Because as Karen was saying earlier, we've got a system that doesn't actually work. A corporate role in a corporate company, which is actually made for men by men. And we have so many systemic preconceptions. Like when I was thinking of what a good mother is, I was thinking I had to be there all the time, always on, always knowing what was there, being loving, never getting angry, all these things. When actually, when I looked at it on paper, it was like a Stepford wife, right? And that's not who I am at all. I want to be able to show my son what real life is, that I make mistakes, but it's what I do afterwards that counts. And that realization of like, well, where do those preconceptions come from? Are they mine? Is it how I was brought up in the UK, where I went to school? Are they family pieces? And do they actually resonate with me? Because we all have the opportunity, if it doesn't resonate, you can replace it. And being able to redefine what a good mum is to me, but also redefine what a successful woman is. I was always, before I'm 40, I want to be a director. But, like I want all these things. I want the role, I want the salary, I want the travel, I want the business, all these kind of preconceptions of what a successful woman is. And actually those things didn't really matter anymore. Like Niti said, like everything changed nearly overnight. The things that I thought I should want didn't resonate anymore. And I had to give myself permission to redefine what that meant. And that is going to be different for everybody. So understanding what your purpose is, making what Khadija was saying about, is the work that I'm doing worthwhile? Is it where I want to be spending my time? How is it that I want to turn up? What everybody said already, being able to figure out what that means to you. And there's no right or wrong answer. Niti, when you were saying about understanding your personal values, I remember doing that. And I remember sitting down and just bursting into tears. And I just wanted someone to tell me what the right answer was, because I couldn't think of what it was myself. Right? I was so into that structure, in that patriarchal structure, that I couldn't see it. So I think for me, the message is that it can be whatever you want it to be. If you are ambitious, you can be ambitious, but it doesn't have to be right now either. Your Dharma will wait for you. This is a once in a lifetime really situation where you can give yourself a chance to slow down, lean into who you're becoming, really define who you are, what you want, where you want to go, and then figure out how you're going to get there. And it's not one size fits all. It's really personal.
I really resonate with everything that all of you have mentioned about really defining your purpose and choosing your why, right? I think I want to offer some empathy for all these questions as well that are being asked, because we are high achievers in general, conditioned to a certain way of living, right? Like effort and result, and conditioned in a certain way. But so when these life-changing moments happen, we're like, oh my gosh, it feels like everything is being thrown. It's not linear anymore. And so just to add on maybe one level of practicality that has helped me is to think of my life in chapters. And many of you asked about money, and it truly is important. I think we just meet this perfect storm, right? No time, no money. Usually it depends on the age that you're having children. So I would say, on the other hand, sometimes we are in that culture where it's like, okay, we just want more money, more titles, more everything, right? Actually, what is the amount you need? So for those of you who do need to continue to work, being able to sit down with your partner, or if you don't have a partner, just sit down with a friend and think about a financial planner to think about, what is that? Like, what do I actually need to make right now? Because it can often be an unlimited pursuit, just a marker of our identity. And that stops us from asking some of the questions that Sarah and Katja and Nidhi have been talking about. So I think that another thing I would say is I think I'll end there. I think maybe just add that layer of life in chapters, maybe in the next 2 years, what you need to do. Because as I was talking to Sarah earlier today, I also realized my kids just like went out of the 5-year-old age range, and things do change a lot after that. We just cannot see it when we're in the tunnel, right? And there was, once my kids were older and my husband was out of his PhD, it was like these new vistas opened up to me. Whereas for those 5 years, I just had to like bury my head and do what I had to do for the family. So it's a chapter and it's finite, and you're not making decisions for the rest of your, it's just for this 2 years or 3 years, right?
Yeah, that's a really good one. I was reading a book which I really highly recommend. It's called Mother Untitled by Neha Rush, and she reminded us when we're thinking about the future, when it feels so uncertain, just think about your birth plan. Think about how you thought you would go into breastfeeding. Maybe I thought it would be like the most natural thing, and it went out the window. And birth plan A definitely did not happen. So like realizing that there's so little that I can actually self-control, and to see it as learning along the way, it's been helpful as I think about, even my own struggling and figuring out this whole piece, to be a bit more open-handed and to realize that I'm no longer the same, and I'm leaning into a new Sarah, a new version. So I think it's a really important mindset shift to see this transition as an opportunity to rethink and question the assumptions. That's what I think Nidhi and Sarah you've mentioned, and to take stock of what really matters to us. So this has been a huge part of the podcast, and I see this as an opportunity rather than like almost like something that we have to solve, right? All right, but talking about solving, we obviously want to talk about some practical steps, how each of y'all find your options for yourself. And what I've done is to break it up within the corporate life, the corporate path, and also outside of the corporate. So within the corporate, we're talking about having flexibility, negotiations with your managers, having programs that support your return to work after maternity, things like job sharing. And so this is where I'd love to have Sarah and Katina share a bit more. And then for the outside of corporate, where we're looking at freelance and consulting, things like that, we'd love to hear the journey of Nidhi and Karen, since you all have been in that for a couple of years now.
Sure, I don't mind kicking off from a corporate perspective. So my son's 3 and I had 5 months off maternity, and I was going back to a company that I loved. LinkedIn are fantastic. I picked the company that I'm working at because of the flexibility, the culture, everything was right. There was a lot of benefits and support around going on maternity leave and coming back. And even with all of that, which I felt very, very fortunate to have, I remember going back to work on my first day. My son was sick and he was crying when I left, so I felt like I'd failed before I'd even started. I remember getting into the office and thinking, oh my God, I don't fit here anymore. So even when you have all of that support, that huge identity shift, which I now know is called, but before I didn't know what it was, everything changed overnight. I didn't understand why I felt so different and how it impacted absolutely everything in my life. But one of the really amazing things that I did have through LinkedIn was a return to work mentor. So I had another mum that had already lived through the return to work after maternity. She'd been there in my shoes, she got it. I met with her before I went back to work, and then she supported me through that process of really understanding what I needed to succeed and giving me the confidence to ask for it. Now, I don't know if that would work in every company or every situation, but actually when I went and spoke to my boss, they were like, yeah, fine. I was pumping at the time. I pumped an hour in the morning to get a litre of milk. I couldn't get in until 9:30. I was scared to even ask for that. So one of the things that I think it's really important is actually kind of finding your village, right? You're stepping out of your maternity mums groups of toddler play dates and that support and that mum network, and you're going back into the office. Whether that's other mums within the working environment that you can create that network with, or being able to find a return to work mentor. Like Sarah was saying at the beginning, we're just about to launch Return Ready, which is a peer-to-peer mentoring program within Singapore, where we have a panel of mum mentors, 2 of which are here, Sarah and Khadija, who you can get paired up with to really support and hold space and listen and share their experiences of going back into the workplace. And just having that person, I remember once when I hadn't slept in 3 nights, my husband was traveling, it was just me on my own, and I just remember turning up in the office and bursting into tears. and my mentor was there. She was able to have a cup of tea with me, and then I went home and had a sleep. You know, like having that type of support, having someone there makes such a huge difference. And being able to find those places where you can create that is really, really important.
Amazing. Thank you. Thanks, Sarah. Khadija?
So in terms of finding options, I think for me it was the transitionary phase about when I had my first one, and then very shortly after that I had my second one. And as I was trying to go back to work, I was also going back to an organization that had just restructured. So I had lost my footing in a way, and my network, everyone had kind of relocated. So the first thing that I did, and because I was so passionate and I felt like, there was something here about working part-time and job sharing, I did not stop talking about it. At that time, that was 2018, actually. Yeah, 2018. I did not stop talking about it. I just gathered as many case studies that I could, examples of success stories. And I would talk to, the HR teams in the company that I was at, which was a pretty good company, but, it still was challenging because there are headcount issues when you're talking about reducing your role. Some roles can't be done part-time. It's hard to do a job share role because if you want, job share is essentially, for those who don't know, it's when two people work 3 days a week each at 60% capacity, and this is the ideal job share. That's when it's considered job sharing. So that means you're a 1.2 headcount, and a lot of companies don't like doing that because it kind of messes up their whole headcount structure. And then it also rocks the boat internally, right? Because then you have, from a stakeholder management perspective, you have two people working on one role. How would you manage communications? So, I think I had initially a lot of exploratory chats with HR and my bosses at that time on what the options are, and just, ask from a place of curiosity, like, hey, has this been done in the offices here? And then slowly approach the topic of what would it take to get there from their perspective. I did not find it in that company, so I left. And then, the second part that I want to mention is networking is so important, because my next role the offer came from someone who had known me from the first company and had heard me talk about how passionate I was about finding this part-time role. So she told me, hey, we can't do it yet, but why don't you come on board, work full-time, and then we'll take it from there. So I did go, I joined Zespri full-time, and it still wasn't working for me. And she couldn't do anything about it. So I kind of took a year sabbatical out because I just, at that point, the full time was just not working for me. My second one was 18 months old. And then when my 1 year sabbatical was over, they came back saying, hey, are you going to come back? And I was like, yes, I will, but I'll only come back if it's part-time. By then I had proven myself in this new company as well. So my third point is, you in a way have to also prove yourself to the company that you can manage it in that way, in the capacity of the role as well. And then it became easier to have that conversation, to explore options. I had a supportive boss who was a new boss at that time, on what would it take to make this a job share role. If it can't be done part-time, who will be the other person I'm sharing the role with? And I was given the autonomy to interview other candidates who would be my job share partners. But because of all the research I had done before, I knew exactly how to approach it. So I think, if you want to navigate this space of, going into lower capacity of working 50%, 60%, 80% in the future, do your research, gather case studies, be open to have exploratory chats with as many people as you can. Secondly, network, talk to as many people as you can, find a mentor internally to have these chats with, have a coffee with them, and then if you're not finding it within your current company, research outwards to see what are other companies. And you'd be surprised if you do a search on Google with the right keywords at the right platforms like Mums at Work or Half the Sky, you might be surprised at the kind of results you will find.
Thank you. And I just want to make quick comments, and I see some questions. Yeah, all these resources and programs that Sarah shared will be shared in a resource list at the end of today's discussion. So yeah, stay tuned for that. All right. Thank you for sharing about your experience of finding that flexibility within corporate, Sarah and Khadija. So now we want to look a little bit outside, kind of to hear how did you take those first few tentative steps, leaving your secure role in a corporate to start doing something on your own. So this is for Niti and Karen. Niti, you want to go ahead?
Sure. So, look, I never had any aspirations to be an entrepreneur. It kind of just came out a little bit out of the blue because of my experiences during COVID. And it wasn't without trepidation. Like, I mean, I won't lie and say that it was easy. It was definitely not easy. And so, when I made that decision to step out and do my own thing, one of the biggest considerations for me at the time, and what kind of led to my portfolio career, was how was I going to maintain an income? Starting something completely new and having been in a field for 20 years by that time and having studied hard to get there and all the rest of it, it was daunting to go, I'm just going to put that to a side and start something completely new instead. And this is something I often talk to clients about when I'm doing my career coaching with them, and it's kind of, you don't need to approach a career move or a move into entrepreneurship like jumping off a cliff, which is how we often like verbalize these moves. Because if you actually think about jumping off a cliff, no one would ever do it. You wouldn't even get close to the edge of the cliff. So it's really about going, okay, where do I want to go? Like, what do I want to be doing into the future? And for me, that was the coaching and diversity space. But I was like, okay, that's my North Star. But to get to my North Star, there's got to be a map to get there. And my map has to involve financial security along the way. And for me, that was doing my legal work. Now, what I didn't realize along at that time was actually the legal work was doing more for me than just providing financial security. Occasionally, it was allowing me emotional stability as well, because I was allowed to, switch. I was able to switch off during those times, because coaching and diversity work is very on and you have to be very present all the time. Whereas with legal work, I could not be as present to a certain extent. And so I think the first step is really identifying for yourself, what is it you want? And that is often the hardest bit for many people, is actually going, what do I want to do? Right? Where do I want to go if I do want to leave corporate and start something new? And when you've got that in mind, then I think the next step is going, okay, what does that look like in terms of a roadmap? Now, some, I guess, tips or keys for me that led me to where I am today were, one, building a brand was really huge for me. I did it very unintentionally during COVID. Whilst I was working in corporate, it wasn't with any particular aim in mind, but I did start sharing a lot on LinkedIn, and as a result, built a really big profile of people on the network. And so when I wanted to actually then start my own thing, I had all these people who were coming to me and going, well, hang on, why don't you do this with me and this with me? And, and so I got opportunities from people that I had connected with over those few years as well. And that continues to happen to date. Now, does that mean there's a question here about needing to be an excellent salesperson? My biggest limiting belief when I was starting out in my business was that I'm terrible at selling anything. However, what I had wrong in my head was how I was looking at selling. Because selling, we can often think of as being really icky, but it doesn't have to be icky. And, as women, we're often conditioned to not promote ourselves. We're conditioned to sort of be modest and to be small, or to keep ourselves a little bit small. But you can self-promote yourself in a way that still feels to you and doesn't feel ick. And I do this all the time on LinkedIn when I'm sharing, for example, podcast episodes and things. I always start with what's in it for the person reading, and then let me share the fact that, there's a podcast episode that they can go and listen to, or there's an article that they can go and watch, or I'm speaking at an event, right? But what's in it for the reader to begin with? And I think it's just reframing some of these ideas that we have around selling and about personal branding, and doing it in a way that feels authentic to you. And that could involve in-person networking as much as it does, online networking, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that's really, really key. And the other thing I would say that's really, really key is being flexible. I know many people that when they're starting off their business are like, I'm going to do X and that's what I'm going to do, and that's it, and that's my thing. When you're really rigid in your thinking around what your business is going to look like, you run the risk of it not working and then falling apart or going back to what you were doing before because it hasn't worked. And so my big tip would be open to things evolving and changing, because most people who start a business, their business does not look like the business they started even a year down the track. And I definitely know my business continues to evolve, and every year I go, I'm going in a different direction to what I thought I would be going in, but you know what, that's okay. And so I think being flexible is really, really important.
I really love that, Niti. Thanks for sharing the journey. I agree that, like you, I did not plan to start a business whatsoever. I just wanted to get free of these corporate infrastructures. And again, back to chapters. At the time, my husband was able to, he had graduated from his PhD. And so it was like, okay, this is a chapter where I'm not bearing the entire financial load. So actually, how much do I need to make? All right, let's try to get there. And how much, then in that portfolio, how much experimentation can I take versus, the stuff that I know is secure, right? Like your legal work for me. I knew that startups would hire me to help them with their strategic people and operational issues because I'd done that, right? So that, and then I started to incubate this project on the side, helping women in the midst of workplace adversity. And then that just evolved chapter to chapter into what it is today. What it is today, it may not be what it is in 6 months. Every 6 months, I have to think about that, right? So I really resonate with that journey that you're sharing. I think just to build on Sarah and Katja's point as well, who your network does matter, right? Sarah, you mentioned that return to work community that you had. It turns out that the people with the shared lived experience, preferably current, are the people who are really going to help you navigate the practicalities and the emotions when it comes to your transitions. We find that across the board, whether it's returning to work or navigating a challenging situation, or maybe even trying to build your business from scratch. Because the unique landscape of the emotions and the practical needs and referrals exist in people with lived experience. So I just want to double click on that and really share that point. And then for Katja, I wanted to add on to your point as well. I really agree about the importance of networks and trust and building your reputation. I always say there are two things that grow exponentially. First, investments with compound interest. And we know that, right? Like, so if you haven't put your money in index funds, please do that. But the second thing is actually trust. And as I get older, I realize that I'm reaping the benefits of trust I built much earlier in my life. Even the corporate job I got leading global tech operations, I remember them telling me I had a 5-month-old baby. My husband was going to the US. We were going there to study. I was like, well, I need to tide us over for a while thinking about what's next. So my bosses said, okay, why don't you just try a part-time arrangement? If it tell us, if it works, let's build it up. And I want to address Betty's point because in like, I said, 50%, I'm definitely going to get cheated here. But never mind, start somewhere. Because 50% you're going to get cheated, right? Like to some extent, you're going to work more. So I said, never mind, let's just start there. And then I built credibility, not just by doing my work, but also making sure it was known that I was doing my work. And all the results were, I had to learn how to capture my voice and put that out on LinkedIn. Thank you very much, Sarah, for your company's product, because I realized that I couldn't count on one person to say, good job, Karen. Like it had to be something that was built, and perception does matter. So I was producing results, but I also wanted to let people know that. And then after that, I negotiated for the kind of conditions that I wanted. So there is that kind of progression where sometimes you start to take a not so good deal and then you kind of, prove it and then work it up from there. But make sure that along the way you are talking about it, not in an egotistical way, but in a way that conveys not the amount, but of work, but the value you're bringing to the organization. So I will pause there.
I think I'm just Karen, I think that's such a good point, because if you think about the structures and how corporates work, we still look at presence over performance. We still look at hours worked over results delivered, and we still look at availability over effectiveness. So finding a way where you can actually articulate the value that you're bringing, and then using that trust and that profile that you've brought up, that doesn't just change that for you, it changes the system, right? Yeah. And if we are all able to find a way in doing that in our own ways, that's where the systemic change really, really happens. I think that's such a great point.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Can I share also like other women's stories? Because I want to encourage people who are in that state. I'm working with I'm coaching a CEO, AI CEO. She's a woman, and she has the most interesting career journey. She actually took a number of years out, totally 100% stay-at-home mom. And you would think, how does this person get back into this track? I mean, this is a really amazing startup. Okay, and she took the years off, and through a connection, she started working 1 day a week, and then she started working a couple more days a week. And then over time, she became the best person to take over the job. And it was when her kids were older too. And the thing I admire so much about her was that she was not really shaken at the time, right? She knew it. She said, okay, they're young. I'm just going to take this I'm just going to stay engaged. I'm going to do my job really well within these constraints. It might not be the best deal. Okay. But when you work with people and they know your quality, I say networking is not about just building relationships like, yay, I'm friendly. It's about showing what you can do. It almost always pays off because, it's actually really hard to find quality people now as an employer. And I'm like, if you can show me that, I would give you your conditions, but finding the opportunity to show, right? And I have another friend who was in a corporate job, and now she has leveraged some of that skill. Amazing communication skill. She did many, many other things, but she's the best communicator I've ever met. And when one day a CEO asked me, I need a speechwriter, who's the best one you know? I said, that person. And she's been working, it's in a highly leveraged way. So it's just like, you are definitely good at something, right? Just take a small step and start to build that trust.
Can I add just one other point? And this is something I often say to people as well when I'm coaching them, is sometimes it's really important to think about the strategic conversations you're having in the workplace as well. And oftentimes when it comes to parental leave and returning to work, we're so focused on the here and now that our career shrinks from this really lengthy period of time into the next 2 years or next 1 year even at times. And I think sometimes it's really important to be having those conversations if you do have these aspirations for your career, which are more long-term and far-reaching and whatever, and that's not for everyone, of course. But if that is where you're at, really thinking about how you're having, what conversations you're having about your longer-term career aspirations and where you want to go into the future. Because the more you have those conversations around the logistical conversations around how you want to work now, the more you change the mindset of your manager from looking at your career as this really short period of time where you have young kids to the entire length of your career. And the more you are conveying to them that you do have these career, aspirations, you are committed to your career, all the things that women often get laden down with once they return to work from parental leave, particularly when they're working flexibly, you can combat those quite proactively by being a little bit clever about the conversations that you're also having at work. And I think, much as no one wants to think that, they're playing the game or, gaming the system or anything else, the reality is the system is, I think, as Karen mentioned before, I think it was Karen, is very slow to change. And, it's going to take time for these outdated models to disappear. And until that happens, sometimes we also need to learn how to put our best foot forward and actually tell people what we want them to see, which might be, I'm committed to my career and here's where I want to go into the future.
It might also, just on the flip side of that, it's totally okay if everything has changed. If you don't know where that looks like anymore, you come back to work and you think, I thought this is where I wanted to go, but now everything's changed and I don't know what that looks like. That's also okay, right? Because it could go either way. And I think it's like everyone's in here of understanding your value, understanding what you're good at, where you bring value, what you're passionate about, being able to go into those. And if you can and you know where you want to go, then yeah, shout it from the rooftops and have those conversations. But also give yourself grace because you don't have to do everything in the first 3 months of coming back to work.
Wow, thank you so much, Liz. Really enjoying this back and forth and building on each other's points. I think we've covered so much ground. We have a little bit more time for the last, which I think we did start to touch on a little bit about staying relevant if we were to take a break. This is a question for everyone over here. Is there any time to return? What are some ways that we can stay relevant?
To share this, I know who took 8 years out and went on a career break. And when she rejoined the workforce and she interviewed for a role, she got the offer and they asked her, what was your last drawn salary? And she quoted her salary from 8 years ago. And I remember having this conversation with her and asking her, why did you not, bump it up or look at the market value? And she said, oh no, that's just what I thought, it would be, it would make sense. And I think this question is so important, right? Because even though you're out during your career break, it doesn't mean that your value has diminished over time. In fact, you have gained some other skill sets over time. And it's so important to stay in touch with the market or keep talking to those in the industry that you're interested in. And it can change over time as well, but keep up to date with the changes and don't shortchange yourself when you're coming back. I just thought of that when you brought up career breaks. I think there's also a certain fear about taking career breaks. I know I was really fearful of it, thinking that, if I take one, I don't know how I'm ever going to get back.
Yeah, the fear is real. Even myself,
Yeah.
I am sharing a little bit of my own experience where I was in health tech, and now I'm consulting, so I'm not full time. But like one of the things I've tried to stay relevant, to understand how the industry is moving, is to take courses online. And I think that that's something that everyone can do, because yeah, things change and move so much. And in fact, sometimes I think being in the working, well, you might be even more like restricted to your own space, versus now where you're actually not in it, you actually have the opportunity to explore or look at it more from a macro view. So I've seen that as an opportunity rather than limiting experience.
Yeah. I mean, in that 1 year sabbatical that I took, I mean, it's not really a career break, but I did join Antler, which is an early stage, fund that brings together founders so they can work on startup ideas. And while I didn't get the funding, it did lead me to the path to start my own company. But also it equipped me with, the skills I needed to go back to my innovation role. So I think of it as a way, like, there are so many different ways to still upgrade your skill set through different means.
Anyone else would like to chime in on this?
Yeah, I literally have just put into the chat this amazing podcast episode, which is called Your Dharma Will Wait For You. And it takes you through this lady's experience of taking a career break. She had spent her career of building up to be a speaker, just about to get a deal with a television show. And then she had a child and decided to take the career break. And suddenly all the people that she had taught on how to do what she was doing were like blowing up and becoming really popular, and she felt like she had missed out. But then there was this whole piece about your dharma will wait for you. Like, whatever is meant for you is going to come for you, and you don't have to do it all in this minute. And I think sometimes we think we have these really high standards for ourselves, that we have to do it all and we need to be successful, be the good mum, be doing all of the things and being shown as being busy and successful all of the time. But like I said at the beginning, of being able just to slow down a little bit and start to actually go back into some of the things that you really enjoy, right? When was the last time you did something because you really, really loved it? Is there something that you stopped doing because you didn't think that you were very good at it? I've done a lot of work at the Ikigai, so finding out your life's purpose, really. So which breaks down into, what are you good at? What is the value that you're going to give? What are you passionate about? So what really lights you up? In what ways can you make money? So there's maybe different ways, and what needs to change in the world. So it goes back into what Khadija was saying at the beginning of, is the work that I'm doing really purposeful? And then when you're kind of going in and starting to connect with some of those things that you really love to do, that you're passionate about, you can demonstrate the value, as we were saying before. And then you can start looking at different ways that you can earn money. Like, that's what you're doing, right, Sarah? You're looking at a portfolio career that actually, it doesn't have to be the standard 9 to 5 corporate role. Actually, you can start to look at how you're making money in different ways. And I'm not saying it's exactly the right fit, but it doesn't have to be what you've always done. It can be doing something different. And if you can then do something that you really, really love, that seems worth it, that lights you up, and was also maybe answering one of those questions in the world that you feel we can do better in, you have your purpose wrapped up in that. So whether that's actually finding a company that resonates with your values, or whether it's going and doing something completely different, there's a different way to start to switch that up and stay relevant in a way that feels good for you, that maybe isn't the norm or the usual way.
Any of the panelists, do you have any last words that you'd like to share with us today?
Yeah, I was just on Nangi's comment around, I think this is a very real thing for many of us, what might other people think, what, should I be doing versus what do I want to be doing, are very real questions that go through many of our heads. And I know when I was starting off on my entrepreneurial journey, that was a very big thing. I was really worried about how my immigrant family, my immigrant parents would react to the news that I was giving up my lucrative legal career, where I was now heading up legal teams, to start what felt like from scratch in a field that they knew nothing about and still honestly probably don't know much about. And so, I think when it comes to, these thoughts around what might other people think, and what views do they have of me, etc., all these internalized expectations that we hold, I think that's where it really does come back down to really getting in touch with your own values, like really deeply. And also, I think particularly when you come from, and I think this is something I see particularly working in Australia, where it's a very individualistic community background, like the most people have come from, versus, say, for example, my heritage, which is Indian, and so far more collectivist or community-based, family-based, etc., is also dissecting within that, what are my values versus what are the values of my community or my family? What are the things that I have been taught I should believe versus the things I really prioritize and want to need in life, right? And really getting, in touch with that, I think can help us with so many of these big question marks that we have around other people's expectations. What should I do? Where should I go next? Can I do it? What am I scared of, etc.? Because, I really firmly believe that you can't answer any of those questions until you get to know yourself better. And that's where the magic starts. So really spending the time working on that before we seeking other people or leaning into what they think I should do, etc., because then you're going to have far more conviction in you to begin with. So I just wanted to add that.
I really, really love that, Nidhi, and I think I want to add on to that, because I don't know whether it's the way we're brought up or even the structure of the capitalist world, but I think sometimes we define ourselves by our usefulness. And I remember thinking that a lot, like, oh, like, am I useful to this person and that person? I do think there's a female element to this, or am I relevant, right? Trying to fit in. But what I realized working over time with many men and many women is when we're in this state of depletion, so tired already, right? Like, we think, okay, now I need to add one more thing to my list and like network and now build my brand and all of that. But actually the first critical step is, I think, was it Sarah who mentioned it, or Katja, but reconnecting with your inherent joy and your connection, just things that are non-productive, that make you feel you. Because if not, you're going to be acting out of a totally different, somebody else's notion of yourself, right? And oftentimes when I've had to make a career switch, I've had to not jump immediately. I almost have to reset for 3 months, right? I'm not overly anchored to that past thing. So I just wanted to say, like, even if you're in work, right, mid-career is where every single woman starts to think, how do I not just fit in? How do I define what I want and move from that place? And it's such an opportunity when we're at these crossroads of life, when we have kids, to really, really lean into who we are and like our inherent value, who we are inherently, and start to then move out into the world from that place of strength. And why I respect that female CEO so much is because she leads from this place where she's almost unshakable. She's like, I kind of know who I am. Like, I was not working for 4 years and I was me. And then I'm still me. So you know what? No bullshit, right? Like, this is what I believe about how this thing needs to work. And there's so little self-doubt because she's had that time to really discover like the strength of her inner person, which many of you, if you're not, you're mothering, that's such a critical journey to realizing that it's not wasted. Yeah, so I want to.
I think that's such a great point, Karen. And I just want to kind of add to that, reconnecting to yourself, doing what really gives you joy, because there's also something called postnatal depletion. I don't know if anyone's heard of it before. There's a doctor called Dr. Oscar Serelak, who's done a lot of research in Australia around what postnatal depletion is. And a lot of the actual symptoms, anxiety, low libido, exhaustion, like all these kind of things, I remember learning about it and thinking, well, I've got all of these things. And still, as Karen was saying, I was like, I could see everybody around me doing it, doing all the things and succeeding, and thinking, well, why can't I do it? I must be broken. So I have to get up earlier. I have to do more. I have to be more on it. But when I actually saw that postnatal depletion was a thing, and then figured out that actually I needed to prioritize my sleep, which is difficult with a newborn, but like the actual sleep that I was getting, it needed to be as good as possible. I needed to be able to rest, not just in a way of going for a bubble bath or a session, a yoga session, but actually really understanding what those triggers were for me and the different types of rest that I needed to get, whether it's from my screen, whether it's from, having a quiet space or whatever that looked like. And then being able to kind of build those foundations. Everyone says we can't operate on an empty cup, but actually what we really need to understand is how do we cultivate that type of rest for ourselves to enable us to be able to do those things. Because we're in a society where the busy badge is used as a badge of honor. Like, how many times today even someone asks you how you are or what you're up to, and you go, oh, I'm really busy. It's a default, when actually we need to be able to stop, reconnect with ourselves, and be able to give ourselves permission to rest. Because when we rest, we can actually do more. When we slow down and we rest, we can actually do more.
I wanted to share just very quickly, my coach told me something that was really liberating when I had started Moxie, and I felt, because I was coming out of the Antler program, I felt this pressure to, oh, I must go down the route of funding. If I don't get funding, it's not going to be a successful idea. And she told me, you know what, like the idea that she shared with me was that life is just a big canvas, like whether it's your life, whether it's your business, like there's no right or wrong way. You do what works for you and what gives you joy, what makes you happy. And I think that was so incredibly liberating because it gave me back the control that I wanted and I needed to be able to, design it the way that I want to, to make it a sustainable business that can grow as my family grows, And then the other thing that I wanted to share was, manifesting and keeping a positive outlook. If you're sure about what you want, don't stop asking for it, and don't stop talking about it, because eventually it will come to you. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of share that. Yeah, it just occurred to me that I've been trying to pursue job sharing since 2018, and I just got it last year, so 6 years later. But I knew deep down inside, like, this was something that was going to work for me. And so I just wanted to share that too. Stay positive, ask for what you want, don't be afraid to ask for what you want.
Amazing. Thank you so much, ladies. I think the clearest piece that I've seen is that all of you have done immense work on yourselves before you've even gone out to look for a new way of thriving in work. And I think that's the biggest takeaway that I have today, seeing that that's the biggest piece of work that we need to be doing, I think, constantly, because things keep changing. And so with that, I just want to thank you all again for your time. Before we end off over here, I wanted to share this page. So I think during our conversation, we've talked about a couple of resources. There's a link over here, resources that I will put in, the return ready stuff, the books, the podcast that Sarah shared. And we also have, for Make It Work, a WhatsApp group. And for those who joined halfway, this is under the Make It Work podcast, which is something I started about 2 years ago when I was trying to figure out the gray between full-time, career mode and full-time. And the conversation today is born out of that. As you can see, everyone has taken really different paths, and they're all so varied, but they're also inspiring. And the biggest thing is for ourselves is to remember that we want to see this transition of motherhood as an opportunity, as something that doesn't stay forever the same. It keeps changing. And if any of the things have resonated with you, please do follow Make It Work as well. I will be sharing a link later. And also, definitely connect with the amazing panelists here today. I think most of them are on LinkedIn. Well, all of them are on LinkedIn. And I think, some also with Karen's one is on Instagram. So definitely look up and follow all these wonderful guests. I think they each have something so different and so unique to offer that, I've gained so much, and I know you will too. So with that, if any of this has been helpful, please do support with a simple like. I'm not, sharing, selling anything. I'm also really bad at selling. That's what I tell myself. But it's something that I know that it's a conversation that needs to be had. I think we talked about looking outside and not seeing things, models that we want to follow. And this is my attempt at, putting out different models, different stories, and different ways that people have made it work, marrying their both end of motherhood and career. So definitely, please support with a simple follow on Instagram, and also you can check out the podcast on the link. And I will be sharing a recording of today's conversation over email. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you for spending that time. And thank you to your partners and spouses and whoever's been helping with you all to avail yourself for today. Good night, everyone.
Thank you for listening to Make It Work, where we uncover inspiring stories of modern working mamas in Asia who have redefined their careers whilst putting family first. Please help others discover the show by leaving a review and rating on wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, and TikTok. Meanwhile, here's to you, making it work.